Most other books are written as a chronological history. My book is not written as a chronological history per se. I mean, it does follow a chronology, but most importantly, it's a conceptual history. In other words, I start off with the background of what nationalism is. Then I start looking at the nationalization of the Palestinian community and the nationalization of the Jewish community, and then the confrontation between the two communities. The other thing that my book has, which most books do not have, is I take a global approach. What I like to do is situate not only the problem itself, but the entirety of Middle Eastern history within global history. So, for example, I divide up the conflict into three parts. The first part is the initial encounter. It starts in 1881 with the first Zionist immigration into Palestine and ends in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel. That's happening locally. What's happening globally is three main processes. Number one, nationalism. Number two, imperialism. And number three, globalization. What I mean by globalization is the mass movement of populations for the first time really in history that takes place during this period. Now, all three have a major impact on the Israel-Palestine conflict. The second period begins in 1948 with the establishment of the State of Israel and the Nakba, the disaster, and lasts until 1993. And this is a period that we can call the Arab-Israeli conflict. Now, I realize there are a lot of books out there that try to do the entirety of the thing between Arabs, calling it an Arab-Israeli conflict. That really is a misnomer. It's a conflict that has always been about Israel and the Palestinians, the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine. So during this period, what we're looking at is two processes globally. Number one, the Cold War. And the Cold War was the major reason why this conflict has lasted to this very day. And then secondly, decolonization, which shaped the demands and the actual organization of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The third period begins in 1993 with the Oslo Accord. That was a period for the first time in which Palestinians and Israelis sat down together to hammer out a two-state solution. We're still within that period, although it appears, based upon recent developments, that that period may be drawing to an end. There are myriad ways in which the situation can play out between Palestinians and Israelis. I think ultimately what we have to decide on is what we want, what the Israelis and Palestinians will live with. There are a lot of people now who are pushing not for a two-state solution anymore, but for a one-state solution. In other words, a united Palestine. The Israelis and Palestinians, of course, are not particularly enthusiastic about that, and the only times that they actually want to advocate for a one-state solution if they think that they're going to be able to dominate it. Their institutions, their laws, demographically dominated, which is not really a one-state solution. I think that we are still within the Oslo period. I think that we are doomed to work on a two-state solution. And the question is, will we have the political will to do that? Now, Israel and Egypt, for example, worked out a peace agreement that nobody expected. Nobody knew that Anwar Sadat would so want to calm the domestic waters by getting back to Sinai that he would, in his own words, go to the Jerusalem if necessary. So the moral of the story is that these things are unpredictable, but a fundamental change of circumstances may happen, and if that does happen, then there could be a two-state solution. Well, there's a difference of opinion about that. I mean, in the immediate future, of course, it's the Israelis who are benefiting from the status quo and the Palestinians who are not. The Palestinians obviously want a state, and the Israelis have pretty much balked at this point at re-engaging with the Palestinians about that state. And making the situation even more difficult, of course, is the settlement issue, the Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. As a result of that, the Palestinian time is actually running out. On the other hand, the Israeli time as well may be running out for certain types of solution. What I mean by that is the demographic balance in the long term is probably going to shift in favor of the Palestinians. And what that means is that the Israelis are going to be confronted with the idea of either having a Palestinian state or no longer having a state of their own. In other words, Palestinians will dominate within a greater Palestine. I don't give President Obama very much credit for his Middle East policies, but actually there was a strategy there besides don't do stupid shit, which was articulated by one of his advisors. The strategy was that Obama wanted to get out of the Middle East and pivot, as he put it, to Asia, which he thought is going to be the greatest challenge to America and American foreign policy in the 21st century. But first, what you have to do to pivot to Asia is to relax things in the Middle East, reduce the American footprint, and calm the waters. This is why, for example, he wanted to bring Iran into the Middle East state system, so it would not act as a spoiler anymore, but be part of that system. And that's also why he pushed so hard for a Israel-Palestine peace in the beginning of his administration. He thinks that, and many people around him, and actually every president since Eisenhower has thought, that resolving the Palestinian-Israeli question would be the key way of ensuring that the region as a whole will calm down. The problem is, of course, is that he got blindsided, as most of us did, by the Arab uprisings and a whole host of other things, the Syrian crisis and shifts that were taking place in the regional balance of power. And so he wasn't able to achieve what he attempted to do. When Donald Trump comes into office, of course, he's not going to have this overriding strategy of trying to get out of the Middle East. If he does have an overriding strategy, it'll be pretty much to avoid external conflicts and to keep the alliances that we already have in the Middle East intact. What that means is Israel. In the beginning of this campaign, he said that the United States has to act as a broker between the two sides. He shifted his stance, and now he's talking about, let Israel expand its settlements, what do we care? And he's also talking now about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, every presidential candidate has declared that he will move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's just that Donald Trump will probably does not have the ability to look to the next step, what's going to happen next, if we do that. If we do that, the situation is going to deteriorate dramatically. I hope they begin to understand exactly what this conflict is all about. I hope that they can actually see that where we've come from and where we're going to, where we're heading right now. In other words, I do what's called contemporary history. And the whole idea of contemporary history is that what you do is you look at the past to understand the present. And that is exactly what I want readers to be able to do, to look at 150 years or so of the past in order to understand where we've been, what we've done that hasn't worked, what Israelis and Palestinians, the traps that they always fall into, and hopefully in that way to understand the situation much better.